phone call, but I may have to leave. Oops, there we go.
Sorry about
Oh.
that. I forgot to put it on earlier.
So
That's
I'll have
okay.
to leave about 11-ish.
Oh, we're sorry about that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's surprising.
So let me ask you guys a question. And if it's out of order, tell me, what do you think prompted John's writing to all of us about when his marriage fell apart? And maybe you guys understand where that came from, but it just was like out of the blue, and I didn't know whether or not the upcoming Super Bowl or something like that triggered this memory of his. I don't.
There were two things, Tim, I think. The Super Bowl coming up and his refusal to go to his old home, and the movie.
And the
True
movie, True Confessions.
True Confessions.
Okay. Thanks.
So
Ned.
now I've got to see True Confessions. Does it involve something related, or I don't know the plot, but
No,
does it have to do with the divorce?
No, not at all.
No,
Okay.
no.
True Confessions is a story that's been likened to a reflection.
Obi?
One of the dimensions of it is a likeness to what was going on in the Los Angeles diocese back in the 50s.
Oh,
And as George has said, really, that's what they wanted to do, but really, it looks more like New York. And
Culturally, it's an East Coast. It's supposed to be
Yeah.
LA.
right,
And there's a McIntyre figure and there's a Hawks figure,
right.
who's Robert De Niro, who's my senior. And quite well done, don't you think? Those
Oh,
are
great.
things.
And
so they
Robert-
kind of disguised it, huh? They disguised it as a New York thing, so McIntyre wouldn't
You
close
know,
it down.
you almost expected to see St. Patrick's pop up sometime. But Duval is the brother
Yeah.
of the Monsignor, who is De Niro. And he's living a hard scrabble life, finding all of the nobles that one find as a detective in Los Angeles. Drinks, yeah, and he's such his brother.
You're
And,
breaking up, George.
The
Ed.
brother.
Yeah, something's going on. You're breaking up, Ned. You have a good
something's
connection.
going on.
The sound.
I don't
Oh, we can't.
I don't have any problems with my connections. I can hear you.
Okay.
Maybe
Well,
Okay.
now you're pretty much back, but you departed a while.
I
And so
did.
do you talk about movies?
Okay.
Someone mentioned, have you guys ever heard or seen a movie called Dogma? It's Ben Affleck and Matt Damon apparently are some angels who come down to heaven. And George Carlin is a Catholic archbishop, if you can imagine George Carlin being.
Why not?
Yeah, why not?
And I tried to look it up and it comes up, but I can't find it either on Netflix or Prime Video. But it apparently is these angels are sent down here to try and right some wrongs, and they keep running into Carlin. And I think that would just be a performance that I would love to see, but I can't find the movie on any. Netflix says it has it, but it doesn't, and Prime Video. But you guys haven't ever heard of Dogma?
Mm-mm.
Okay, all right.
I
Okay.
think I've heard of it, but I haven't seen it.
Who has not seen True Confessions? Gary, George.
I think I may
Tim,
not have seen it.
and Fred.
Either that or I forget about it, but now I'd like to see it. Is it
I've
worth seeing?
Movie.
Yeah, it's a good. It's
You guys have made me want to see it.
And
Yeah.
I think it would raise your blood pressure, Fred.
That's already gone up, thank heaven.
But
Well-
it's set in the late 40s, so it's yeah, all the issues that inflamed us about Hawks / McIntyre don't occur in the movie.
Right.
You know, the cardinal in the movie is quite well done. It's not really McIntyre. You know, more of a simple-ish. Well, no, he's not so simple, is he? That shrewd Irish prelate. And De Niro is just, he is the ambitious cleric rising through the ranks. And then, you know, his life gets complicated.
Yeah.
So let me ask you, is it a chick flick? I mean,
No,
would our wives want to watch it with us, or is it one of those things where Sandra will say, go downstairs and watch it on your own?
she'd probably like it. It's a serious movie, and drama is very well presented.
Okay.
The storylines are significant, and the ending is very
Catholic.
Yeah.
What was the word?
Oh,
Catholic.
Oh, Catholic, of all things.
So it's a Catholic crime drama. Is that,
Yeah, it's a very
Is it-
Catholic movie. I thought.
Absolutely.
In a good sense, in a very good
Yeah.
sense. Yeah, the character of De Niro is a very moving character. He is worldly, is all get out, and then he falls. There's a scandal, and he's caught in it, and so he becomes expendable. To the cardinal.
Should we give them all the?
Well, that's pretty
Oh.
broad
No,
brush.
don't go any further.
That's pretty.
that's
broad
enough,
brush.
George.
Yeah, no, I agree. That's enough, but it's just right, George.
Okay.
Tim, the movie Dogma is listed on YouTube.
Oh,
Oh, it is. Okay.
So
that
try
makes-
try YouTube. It may be one you have to pay. I don't know. I just saw it on the list.
Well, I've got to see George Carlin. I mean, just
How can
He
you
just-
imagine?
I'll be
him?
right back.
Yeah, but watch De Niro and Duvall. They are just
okay. We will. We will.
and they're excellent together.
Can imagine.
Every,
They're great.
everybody's leaving.
Yeah.
Is there any way,
Uh,
Thomas? Is there any way you can text Johnny to see?
Yeah, I think so. Let me,
Because I tried to call him about an hour ago. He called me my time kind of late on Wednesday night, and after 9 o'clock my time, I don't answer the phone, so I didn't catch it. And so I thought I tried to call him an hour or so ago, but he didn't answer. So I didn't know if,
Well, I had a long talk with him yesterday or the
Oh,
day
you did?
before. Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah, we talked about his email a lot. I knew his ex and did not care for her. I'll never forget when I was teaching a Salesian in East LA in the 60s. John and I and our respective spouses went somewhere together. And I was all, holding forth about social justice and the education of Hispanic kids in East LA, or the lack thereof, and all that, and how unjust it was. And Kathy was patiently explaining to me that I really didn't know what I was talking about, because it wasn't that society was in any way unjust. It was that these kids were just unmotivated. And that's why they weren't going anywhere educationally, many of them. And I just needed to get over my naivete and see the world as it is.
you must be a lot of fun on a double date.
Well, I forget how it came up. I was more fun than she was.
Yeah,
So-
you're sitting around at a nice dinner. You're sitting around a nice dinner, and someone says, "Well, what do we talk about?" George says, "Well, let's talk about social justice here over our appetizers." Yeah.
Well, then there was the famous Mike Clemens dinner, Ned. Remember that?
Mm-hmm. You tell
Where-
them. I mean,
I forget what had happened in the broader society, but it was the era of family values. So I guess that's like roughly Ronald Reagan, when what the country needed was more attention to family values as distinguished from social justice for families or anything like that. And we were at some restaurant in Santa Ana, and I don't know, I think I couldn't have been on my third drink, but I was probably on my second. And the evening was sort of marred, some thought. Herbert was there, huh, Ned, with us, Mike Clement. When I said, fuck social justice. No. Fuck family values at the height of my lungs in Orange County when it was all sort of,
Surrounded by Berkshires.
yes. They didn't throw me out, but a lot of eyebrows were raised.
The mention of Reagan and social justice reminds me of a story I heard. Mike Deaver, who was one of his big assistants, was asked on a radio program I was listening to, did he support anti-abortion? And he said, oh yes, he was very, very much against abortion. And he said, well, what about after they're born? And Deaver said, not for a minute.
Oh, they're on their own.
Now, did he say that to be funny?
Oh no, I don't. I think Deaver said that's what he thought. That's the way he was. So it goes along with your stance on
Family,
his lack
family
of
values.
social justice awareness.
Yeah, after they're bored, fuck them. But I met Mike Deaver. I sat across the table from Mike Deaver at a meeting of some hours once.
Ah.
Very engaging fellow.
Sure.
And he wasn't even drinking. He developed a real problem with alcoholism, which he then conquered. But very charming guy, very likable man, very capable.
I bet.
Well, what was kind of, since we're talking about family values, I went into a field dealing totally with family breakup, separating parents, single family parents, divorced parents. So I came to, coming from a Catholic background where it was marriage was a sacrament forever, etc. I became aware that there's so many gradations to the human dimension of marriage. Some people can be very immature all of us are immature when we marry, right? In a certain sense, yeah. But there's so much of a human dimension to it. And the more I met with people, I met with some couples that you'd scratch your head and wonder why they ever were together to begin with. But then I'd be meeting with African-American couple that seemed to really love each other. They were upward bound and all that, but it seemed like some stuff from the past came crashing into their lives and kind of drove them apart, kind of very sad seeming. But it seems like a lot of marriages just, there's so many human dimensions to it that it's not necessarily the whole thing of it being a mortal sin and all that kind of totally went out the window for me. It's just.
I never thought ever when I would talk to couples that there was anything sinful. It was just a tragedy.
Yeah.
And Tom, are you the one who was writing? I forget a little exchange about annulment. I mean, you said things that I learned very early on. I would do anything I could to help people
Mhm.
get an annulment. And fortunately, in our diocese, we had, what you call the vicar the judicial vicar, Dan Welton is a good friend of mine, and he was that for our diocese for the longest time. And we just worked really hard together to kind of help people get through this, because I think, Tom, you said that the Pope said that, Tom, did you put that in response? That the Pope said
Yeah,
that most marriages were invalid? And
Yeah, that was one of his, famous or infamous offhand comments in a, I don't know if it was
Laudato Si.
speech or an interview. But
Well, he had an element of that in Laudato Si also.
yeah,
what was that, Ned?
Laudato Si, or what's the other one? The Amoris
Oh, Amoris Laetitia?
Laetitia? I don't know. Anyway,
Amoris Laetitia.
What I came to understand is sort of analogous to that famous statement that's attributed to a number of old Greek philosophers or authors, call no man happy until he's dead. It really is impossible to judge the validity of a marriage until it has successfully
Yes,
terminated by the death of one or the other.
or has become a sacrament over
Yeah.
the years.
Yeah. I
oh,
mean,
that's an interesting thought.
I don't want to go quite so far as death or the end, but my own feeling has often been, hey, you've got two people, and I've run into this so much, two people who have been successfully living a married life for years and years and years, and they can't get married in the church without an annulment, and for whatever reason they don't get or can't get an annulment because one of them was in a tragically unfortunate marriage that common sense tells you wasn't really a marriage, but for whatever reason they can't prove it canonically, or they don't want to go through that process. And that's to me where internal forum comes in.
Absolutely. And I was going to say that I've talked about how Jack O'Hare kind of undid all 12 years of seminary training very early on. Because remember, we came out of the seminary and we had all these, we were dealing with all this stuff, learning about annulments and the valid, what you need for validity and all that sort of stuff. And you had these various cases, the Fresno case. And I tell people that Jack O'Hare developed the Healdsburg case. That's where we were priests, as in Healdsburg. And someone said, what is that? I said, that's where the pastor dissolves in favor of everybody.
Yeah.
And you come to that really in a way by just dealing with people. And you realize that just exactly the situation that you said. I've got a young kid in my parish, St. Vincent's, who's in the seminary, and he's in his pastoral year right now. He's had 2 years of theology, and he's having a year at our cathedral, which is a very conservative place, and he's got 2 more years to go. And we had dinner one night, and I said, well, what are your seminarians talking about? He says, well, we're the seminary, they're not sure where the Pope stands. I said, well, what do you mean? I said, the Pope's very clear on where he stands, and he says, well, no, we talk about where he says about marriage. I said, well, Chris, let me tell you a story. And this is the story. When I was in Eureka, I had a man who came into the catechumen named Norman Edwards. He was a wonderful man. He was a big, powerful, steel driving kind of guy. And he's I guess he was in his 60s. I don't know. And he said, I've been looking to join the Catholic Church for the last 30 years, but nobody ever told me the night or the place, And he joined the catechumen, and he took to it like a duck to water. I mean, he was just enthusiastic. reading the Bible, his boss, Jerry Selvage, who ran a big construction company, said, Father, he says, what are you guys doing to George? I can't get any work out of him. All he wants to do is talk about Jesus, you know. Remember, the first Catholic thing he ever did was on Ash Wednesday. We brought them in and we gave them the ashes. And this George is in the back of the church. And I said to him, George, how are you? He says, Father, he says, I feel wonderful. He says, and I just love Mark. And our bishop was Mark Hurley. And I said, you love him? And he said, well, I like Matthew, Luke, and John, but I love Mark, you know. In the night of the Easter Vigil, when he was baptized, he came up for confirmation with his two daughters on his arms, and he looked like a man in glory. It was wonderful to see. A couple weeks later, his wife came to see me, Lorraine, and she said, Father, she said, now that Norman is baptized and can receive communion, she said, I'd like to know if I can start going to communion too. And I said, why aren't you? Well, she said, well, we weren't married in the church. And I don't know how he got into the catechumenate without that, but I had a team dealing with all this. And I said, well, what happened? She says, well, I was married. I had gotten married in the church, and a year later, my husband left me, and I was never able to find him. And then a couple of years later, Norman and I got married. I said, how long have you two been married? She said, 50 years. And I'm just wondering if I could go to Holy Communion now. I told this story to that seminarian, and so I said to him, so Father Girollo, Lorraine Edwards. And you know, Tom, you has experiences like that. I just told her, Lorraine, you go. I said, I have no idea if your first marriage was valid or not. And there's no possible way for us to even figure that one out. All I know is this one is. And you should not.
And yet they were not married in the church. So that sort of slipped through okay.
They couldn't because she had been married before.
Yeah, right. Yeah. But the catechumenate didn't pick that up though. Okay. All right.
So anyway, but Tim,
Thank God.
We see situations like that all the time. People who I always said to myself, you know, how could God be someone who has in a second marriage or even a third one, I've got who has come to faith, has experienced a deep desire to live out his or her faith in the church anyway, and yet are in some ways prohibited because of these prior relationships. And I keep saying to myself, how can God be calling somebody and not calling them at the same time? It just doesn't make any sense to me, you know?
Yeah.
So I think Pope Francis, when you said he said that, he's obviously a pastor. He was obviously a pastor.
Yeah.
No question.
Yeah, and you know, he's not advocating doing away with the canonical process, you know, like like I would, but
Yeah, I would too.
yeah, you know that, George, you were saying it could be very healing, which
Yeah,
people
well,
have
it's-
found that it is, but I think that there are other ways that healing can take place in former relationships and marriages and so on.
You know, I've been thinking about that, Tom, ever since, you know, I got your email on the subject, because you disagreed with my thought that Bremer might want to give it a shot, you know, because of the healing aspect of it.
When you're 80 years old, what the hell do you want to go through all that crap for?
Well, that's true. That I agree. On reflection, I do agree with you because I was dragged into the annulment process kicking and screaming. I thought it was utter bullshit. And I did it to please my wife and to please her brother, the bishop, and to please Father Ryan. But I thought it was just nonsense. And I would have been happy living out my life And I go to mass several times a week, and I was then going to communion as often as I could, and to hell with it. I mean, it was just absurd to me that these celibates were using their trying to use their fiduciary control over the Eucharist to control people's sex lives. I mean, I just thought it was, how dare they? It's like my wife's aunt was married to a guy who beat her up a few times, and so she left him. And so while she was single, she went to communion every Sunday, etc. This is like in the 50s. And then she meets the new guy and marries him. Well, so much for that. For the next 25 years of her life, she went to mass every Sunday without going to communion, because it would have been a sin. Then the new guy dies and she's back at the altar rail, or I guess by then we were all standing up. But how absurd, how tyrannical, how obscene, I thought.
Yeah.
Shortly after I was ordained, Santa Rosa at the time when I joined that diocese was a very alive place to be. It had been created out of the dregs of San Francisco and Sacramento. And Bishop Leo Maher at the time was the bishop there before he went down to San Diego. He was a real bandit in a lot of ways, but he had some really talented priests. It was a very alive place to be. And there was lots of, a lot of clergy education speakers coming through. And there was one, remember, there was a guy named John Mackenzie, was a Jesuit scripture scholar.
Oh, yeah.
And he
Yeah.
gave a talk. And I remember him specifically saying, I believe that the laws of the Roman Catholic Church regarding marriage and divorce need to change. And he said, not because of any new scripture knowledge that we have, but simply because those laws cause suffering. And that is consistent with the mission of the Church. I just thought that was in the year, I was ordained in 69, so in the early 70s.
Yeah. Actually, Mackenzie lived in Claremont.
Did he really?
And he officially lived at Our Lady of Assumption, although he had another house unofficially in Claremont. But so I met him a couple of times before I became pastor. He died before I became pastor. But his memory there lived on as very few others of the priests that came and went did.
Did he have a ministry of working with married couples, do you think?
No, yeah, he was a scripture scholar.
Yeah, I know.
And I don't think he had that ministry. I think his ministry was basically writing feisty articles against prevailing practice. So,
but I mean, but what he said, George, what you've described is the classic case of how they cause suffering.
yeah.
Oh yeah, I mean, poor Mercy.
And it was the same thing with that birth control business. I had an aunt who went to mass every Sunday. My uncle, they had 4 kids, and then he didn't want any more kids, and he basically forced her to practice birth control. And she went to mass every Sunday for, most of the years of her life, and never received communion until he died.
Mm.
And then she went to mass and could receive communion, I mean, it just.
Well, I hope she went to confession. Forgot.
He had the best.
No, my wife's mother came from Texas, from the Panhandle, Amarillo, as they say, and her family lived in little towns around Amarillo, and one day we were visited. Can you all hear me appropriately?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah,
Okay.
yeah, you're better.
One day we had a visit from two of her mom's sisters and got to talking about the parish or parishes. And it turned out there was a pastor in one of the small churches that took care of all of that kind of stuff.
Yes.
They came to him. He listened. He asked lots of questions. Sometimes he called other people to come in and talk with him. And then he declared, this is
Yes.
okay, no problem. And everybody was, it was just great.
Well, I have a friend named Harry Gregg. He's a priest in the Diocese of Lake Charles, Louisiana.
Mhm.
And there was a legendary priest. These are all Cajun guys, and there's a place called Guédon, which is somewhere in that diocese in Louisiana. And in the marriage records, this is like I'm not saying the church century, but it's really early in the church, in the 19th century anyway, where there's a series of things that will just say annulled by me, and he says, "What does you know about what's going on in Guédon?"
This reminds me of that Lonergan always used to say that the 1917 Code of Canon Law was a disaster. And I think he must have been thinking like Mackenzie.
Yeah.
Another thing, the funny thing is, they used to, Jesuits used to have, you might remember the Father Lord, S.J., who was the
Yeah,
Daniel,
Lord, yeah.
Daniel Lord.
Daniel Lord.
Yeah.
Well, he had his biography had a very lovely title, and they come from different passages in Ignatius's writing. And someone said for John Mackenzie, the passage that would be appropriate for his biography would be the meanest thing in the house. But the other thing that this reminds me of in relation to the Pope's statement, I once was at the the house of a colleague of mine, and in the conversation, he discovered from his wife that a couple who lived very close to them and to whom they were rather close were getting divorced. And Pat said, "Well, why on earth did they get divorced?" And Joan said, they lost the hots for each other, which made me realize that the motives for getting married at a certain age aren't the same motives that you need to stay married.
Well, that's for sure.
Yep.
I can speak to that. That's for sure.
My parents got married in 1939. My mom was a missionary Baptist from Oklahoma, and
Where in Oklahoma?
Chickasha.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Wife's from Oklahoma, so.
Huh?
My wife's from Oklahoma, so
Where?
Stillwater.
I don't know. But
Oklahoma State, OSU. Yeah.
Oklahoma State, right?
Yeah, on a
Yeah.
side note, my mom grew up less than 100 miles from Tulsa
Yeah.
and was watching PBS one night during she was in her 80s and learned about the Tulsa massacre for the first time.
Yeah.
And she'd grown up, she was 8 when it happened.
Green brother.
Never heard about it. Unbelievable. But anyway, we had our pastor at St. Rosaleva was a real thug of a foreign-born Irishman. But he told my dad at the confessional, well, I don't know if he knew who he was hearing, but he said, yeah, she's not a Catholic, your wife. And she's going to do what she's going to do. There's nothing you can do about it. So my mom, all those years, I don't know what she used. I would imagine a diaphragm or something that he didn't have to get directly involved in. And he got to just have a ball, then go to communion every Sunday. And, when other guys of his generation were going insane, like that guy Ned in St. Christopher's that was in tears after
Yeah.
Humane Vitae.
Yeah.
My dad just, I doubt he knew there was a problem.
Yeah.
Lonergan said, whoever wrote Humane Vitae knew nothing about science.
Right.
And he said to me, like, is it immoral to shave every morning?
Yes, I believe it
Now
is.
with,
I do believe that it is. If God had
Well,
intended us to.
well, not with an electric razor, for sure.
No, I always wondered about, I never understood, and maybe some of you do, Fred, you're a theologian, that Humani, they base that whole thing on what they call the natural law. And I thought to myself, well, if you look at like this, what nature does, I mean, if a couple have sex every single night for 365 nights in the year, how many of those acts are open to procreation? The majority are not.
Absolutely.
So how do you
Right.
come up with a principle that says it's ordained it must be always open to procreation? I mean, how do you develop that principle theologically? I don't.
Right.
Well,
I know this. It's a dead
360
now because
Uh-huh.
nobody pays attention to that. But I mean,
Right.
But yeah, that's the point of Lonergan's statement. If you're going to talk about natural law,
right.
to know about science. They're discovering what the intelligibility of law is. And you don't pay attention to that, which I think the commission that he went against
Yeah.
prior to the council, they had a mixed group that said there's nothing wrong with contraception, and
Right.
Paul VI just went against it.
Well,
Yeah.
So who is it that writes, and who is it that actually puts their pencil on a piece of paper and writes an encyclical? Is it the pontiff himself, or does he have like a bunch of research assistants and teaching assistants, and he says, pull together a bunch of thoughts like a legal brief? I mean, how does it work? Because I don't have any idea how that would have worked. Who
Well,
writes it?
Question.
I don't think anybody has any idea how that works. That sort of
Well, probably
magically appear like Venus from the
that
sea.
is news. Yeah. And it probably varies by pope to pope.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I know for sure that Sebastian Trump, oddly enough, Jesuit at the Greg, wrote Mystici Corporis
Hmm.
from top to
Hmm.
bottom. He taught ecclesiology at the Greg.
Good for him.
Yeah, that's a good one.
But did anybody read what I sent a few weeks ago about this book about Archbishop Jadot,
Yeah, so
Yeah, I
Yes,
did.
it's fascinating.
where
it really
fascinating.
wasn't about him. It was about that other jerk.
What
Oh,
other
Cody.
A good friend.
Well, yeah, that was another thing.
what other
Uh,
you're
part
talking
of
about?
it. The whole book is fascinating, and especially to get Jadot's view of the United States in the 1970s,
Huh.
which is, I mean, he was remarkably prescient to see the seeds of what's happening now, the polarization of what's happening now, happening back then. But, his Jadot, in this interview with the author, said that Jadot said that he had a private meeting with Pope Paul VI, and the Pope was upset about strong reactions. And Jadot said to Pope Paul, well, what did you expect? And Pope Paul replied, I expected people to read the encyclical, consider it seriously, and then decide what to do in fidelity to their own consciences.
That's what we did.
I don't think,
Yeah, yeah, why didn't he come out and say that? It
Yeah,
would have saved a lot of trouble.
Yeah, it would have saved a lot of
Great.
trouble. And also, in 69, this is in a footnote, Paul VI had a personal meeting with Cardinal Sunens, who expressed
who is that?
agreement.
Who was that?
Cardinal
From
Sunens,
Belgium.
he was in Belgium, yeah.
Yeah, he was a progressive.
he was a great
Cardinal.
guy. Yeah,
Yeah,
But
wonderful guy.
he expressed his disagreement and disappointment. And he says the Pope listened and then simply replied, yes, pray for me. Because of my weaknesses, the church is badly governed.
yeah, yeah. Come to think of it, there may be a purgatory for someone like him.
Now, even if you've been canonized.
You know, when,
Herbert, Herbert told
When
me
that-
was, Herbert
when
was
Humana came out, I was at the time going through my transition period. I had the class got ordained. I was beginning my subdiaconate, I guess, journey, and I was sent to Bill Berry at Claremont, and it was a great time because there were a number of guys floated through there who were going to the graduate school of theology, but
Right.
they would stay at the rectory. And one was a guy named George McCrae, who was and Fred, you've heard of him. He was a Jesuit at Harvard. He was a scripture
Yeah.
scholar. He taught at Harvard.
Yes.
George McCrae, a great guy, and we
Yeah.
got to be friends. And I actually had dinner with him one night at the Harvard Faculty Club. You know, when I was, but you know, all the theologians had debunked all the theological arguments for, you know, to substantiate the birth control teaching. And when Humanae Vitae came out, the Pope just used the same old arguments. And I just remember George saying, I've never been asked to have to believe something not based on the theological arguments, but simply on the authority of the Pope. And that's the only reason.
Mhm.
Is that
Herbert Ryan knew Sunens well because of Herbert's involvement in the whole ecumenical thing,
Yeah,
which Sunens
right.
was also involved with.
Mhm.
And Sunens told Herbert that Paul VI's original draft was actually putting this on a de fide basis.
I know.
What's that, George? What does that mean?
This is an infallible teaching, or just
Oh,
short of that. It was either infallible or just shy. And Sunens, according to Herbert's version of Sunens, fell to his knees, and in tears begged Paul to change his mind about that. And Paul did, because he loves Sunens. Sunens was an extremely prestigious guy, Tim.
yeah, yeah.
Uh,
He was a hero for many.
Wonderful
Yeah.
guy.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Same here.
A
Yeah.
leader at Vatican II.
Pardon me, Fred?
And a leader at
A
Vatican.
leader.
Yeah.
Does anybody,
So are we to take from this, guys, that Paul VI really needed somehow to keep the myth so long explained or proclaimed, but really was lukewarm about it? I mean, if you hear he wants to make it de fide, and on the other hand, he said, well, I wanted people to think about it and then make up their own minds. I didn't really mean that it was anything other than for consideration. I mean, that's
I'd like to make a distinction here. One is, I think that encyclical was meant to emphasize the principles that are needed to make the decision. It wasn't really a pastoral encyclical. It was simply trying to enunciate doctrinal principles, leaving the application up to the pastoral.
Sandra, he is out there barking like crazy. Did you hear me?
Sounds like Tim's barking.
Well, I apologize.
But anyway, you know, to me, the interesting and forgotten thing is within months after the encyclical, almost every bishop conference in the world, including the Americans, published a letter of some sort, a document of some sort, giving a pastoral interpretation that softened it a great deal and allowed for, you know, discernment of conscience.
Yeah, I know most confessors in Boston didn't even pay attention to it.
Yeah. And, you know, whether it should have been paid attention to or not, I don't know. But he certainly, there were very, very few bishops' conferences throughout the world that actually took a hard line on that. You had a lot of priests and individual bishops taking a hard line, but
I was going to say, James Francis Cardinal McIntyre certainly backed that. And when the encyclical came out, I was at St. Christopher's, and Father Bramble said, Mr. Chavira, or Reverend Mr. Chavira, you will now preach at all the masses, and you will make everyone aware of what the contents of this encyclical is and how they now must comport themselves. And I said, what? And he said, you are going to do this. And I'm thinking, you know, I'm not the priest, you're the pastor, and we've got a couple of other, you know, priests who are very pastorally inclined in the parish and in the rectory. Why me? You know, and I'm,
Because you were the sacrificial lamb.
holy
That's
crap!
right.
You know, I by that time I had lots of couples that I knew with whom we you know, we had various groups that read the scriptures and talked about them. And remember, I don't know whether you remember, I told you we all had this one empty chair where Jesus was. We wanted to try to emphasize that we're all gathered together in his name, therefore he's there. And some of them, one of them had 9 children, and asked me whether they had to continue to be open to procreation. And I said, look, I'm not a priest. You guys have to use your consciences to decide about that. But you got 9 kids, and you're having horrible trouble trying to feed everybody and clothe everybody and protect them. It would seem that you've fulfilled your duty to be fertile and procreate and et cetera. So in concert with these, the people around us, we had about 7 in that group. And we went into prayer, not just that evening, but for months. And she decided, the couple decided, yeah, we're done. We can use birth control. And then I get up on the altar and in the pulpit and say to them, here is the encyclical of Pope Paul VI. This is what George was talking about. And here's what it says. And I'm asked by our pastor to explain it to you. And I could see them. They were, I don't know, second pew from the pulpit, and they were crying. Now they had to go back. These are loving people who work hard and listen and try to keep what the church is telling them in their minds and in their hearts and in their actions. And everything's just been blown up for them.
From a marriage and family therapist point of view, having 10 kids doesn't even leave much time for sex anyway. So why make it more difficult? Why make it more difficult too? On top of that, if anything, a lot of therapy is to try to help people have more sex
more
because
sex,
of
yeah.
shame and embarrassment, or how they're, it's just the opposite problem.
Let me ask
And yet
you-
it's just been wrongheaded.
But you see, celibate priests always think that that married couples don't do anything else.
Yeah, and it's
You're right. And
Well, we
I
try-
have a
we
question.
try not
There-
to.
There are three priests here. After this encyclical came out, was in confession, did you hear a lot of confessing by your parishioners of the fact that they were using birth control? Was it something? So what was the response of the laity to this new dicta that came out from Rome? Did all of a sudden you find that 50% of your confessions were because people were confessing to using it? I mean, what happened in the real world?
Well, we would have been baby priests then,
Yeah.
right? About a year into it, that's it. But that is the question.
Well, even more recently, it does seem that people who have been going to confession regularly and taking those kinds of things seriously and so on, some of them often do confess that. And some, have a tremendous, some do.
Really?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Hey, George, there's all kinds out there.
Yeah, I know.
But the difficulty is that the population that I'm kind of speaking from is a very tiny segment of the Catholic population that even goes to confession anymore.
True.
Alas.
What about you, Gary? Gary, what was your experience?
My experience was that there were a few at the time, but I had run across there was a guy, I think his name was Peter Chirico, a Sulpician. He wrote in Theological Studies about what he called tension morality. It was a way to deal with all of this stuff. He said you have a decision, and you have like 4 or 5 different values that are operative in a decision, and you have to decide which one you're going to follow, and you try to minimize the damage by building up the other values in different ways. Like if you, like Ned or George, somebody who has 9 kids, and then they say, I'm going to have you have a lot of values. You got to take care of your kids. You have to make love to your wife. I mean, you can't have it all the way. So you make a decision about that. And I would tell people.
By the way, the wife has to make love to her husband too.
Yeah, well, I mean,
Yeah.
but I meant the person is trying to go, whoever is the person that's talking to you. But anyway, so if you observe the value is you're going to follow the church's teaching, then you've got to build up other ways of loving your wife, of loving each other and all that sort of stuff. So I would kind of take them through that very quickly. There were not that many, Tim. I just began to believe that the Catholic faithful solved it for themselves.
They did.
And
Yeah.
and you never hear about it anymore, except in the Hispanic community. The Mexican community, I would
Everything is bleeding.
that would come up once in a while in confession, and I would try to tell them, and my Spanish was not that good, but I tried to say, you have to make the best decision you can make, and then be at peace with it, something like that. But I would say that the majority of Catholic faithful, Paul VI, it did a lot of damage in the
Big
church.
time.
Yeah, he did.
Now, what did that do to the credibility
Yeah.
of the official church?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Didn't help.
It didn't help. There's another element basically what Paul VI did was he refused to change.
Yeah.
The teaching. It wasn't that it was a new teaching. It just, the dilemma he had to face was, do I want to be responsible for introducing a new teaching? And
Explain, Tom, explain that. So prior to Humanae
yeah,
Vitae,
birth control,
like when my
never
when my
permitted.
parents got married in 1934. Okay, so what do you think back then was the understanding that Catholic
I just noticed
husbands and
mine.
wives had about birth
They may
control?
not practice birth
Okay.
control. Now,
Okay.
remember, that was before the pill.
Okay.
Okay,
So
Turn
the
the light
only
really
methods of
bright,
birth
okay?
control were physically intrusive, which a lot of
Okay.
people didn't much care for.
Oh, sorry, you're in a meeting, huh?
Yes.
Yeah. Fred is having a little difficulty there.
I
his
think
nurse
he's,
is visiting. with
But
him.
part
His
of
nurses.
No.
part of
Well,
the
this
context,
Abby's
I
not
think.
working anymore.
Okay.
I'll tell you why. You see this?
Yeah.
It's not supposed to look like that.
Oh, I see.
wasn't
This-
there
this-
a sense, wasn't there a sense too that there was a slippery slope that if birth control is okay, then abortion would be okay too, or that would be the next battle line.
There was that sense, but
Mhm.
I
let's
apologize.
let's
okay?
remember, before the 1950s, infant mortality
Sorry for.
was very high. There was something I was reading it was actually talking about the effect of vaccines. But, we can remember, those who are our age can remember when it was not unusual for a family of 5 or 6 kids to have had 1 or 2 or sometimes 3 die of a childhood disease.
Yeah.
All of which have been prevented by vaccines now. So infant mortality was very high.
Are you
The-
okay?
Yeah.
The economic situation up until probably the 1950s or late 50s, early 60s was such that a man could support a family decently on a single salary.
True.
That disappeared real quick. My dad was a common laborer
Can I actually have you sit over
and
here?
could probably
change over
have supported, 3 or 4 or 5 more kids if that were
Okay.
possible. My
I'll bring
mom
you your
health
laptop.
made that
You-
impossible.
Oh, good. Okay.
You worry about getting over there first.
So,
I feel like we're watching an ER program.
Here you go.
Fred, come
Alright?
back.
Now,
Fred.
okay?
there you are.
Stay still.
Sure.
Yeah.
will do.
Yeah.
Are you
Folks, I'm
okay?
I have to go and pick up my stepdaughter's
Some
car.
tires.
Okay.
Okay, Jorge.
Hi, George.
I will sign off and I will look forward to listening to the rest of this.
All
Okay.
right.
Take care, George. God bless.
Okay,
George,
bye all.
have a beautiful, looks like
Yes.
you've got sunny skies back there, George.
Yeah, we do have sunny skies.
Yeah,
What do you
it-
have? Do you still have heat, Tim?
No. We've had rainstorms the last 3
Okay.
days.
Yeah,
We're in the midst of rainstorms.
yeah,
Tim,
Have a
in
good
Cal-
weekend.
Doesn't rain in California most of the winter.
yeah,
Yeah, you get a little more up there, Gary, than we do down here.
yeah.
And we're stymied too.
And you're stymied. Yeah. We just had that one storm
That
a
was
See
month
you,
it.
ago,
Jorge.
and that's
Bye,
it.
George.
Bye,
Didn't
George.
the
George,
didn't the Eagles have a song about it doesn't rain in California or something like that?
well, that's pretty.
Yeah.
pretty
Something
true.
I
like
remember the hotel, but not the rain.
Hotel California. Yeah.
Could I share one or two more items of context?
Yeah,
Birth control simply was not much of a question. It would only be something used if you were trying to have sex outside of a family context or whatever. Most families would probably welcome as many children as they could have for a couple of reasons. Often, until the early 20th century, children were an asset rather than a liability economically,
Yeah.
you know, particularly if you were on a farm.
Farm families, yeah,
Farm families, you want as many kids as you could.
right.
And then, you know, you'd try to have a family of 10 to be able to work the farm prosperously. And 3 of them died from mumps, measles, whooping cough, polio, all of those things that are almost smallpox, all those things that are almost non-existent in our society now. And, you know, it was a real tragedy if you were aiming for 10, and the farm needed it, and you only had 7.
You must be a nurse.
So those were those were part of the context of you know, I think everybody could generally agree that birth control would not be part of most people's consciousness even in those days. Now, that's when the doctrine developed. And it was usually addressed, I think, towards, you know, people who were well enough off that, you know, they, for their own selfish reasons, wanted to limit the number of children. But, you know, more often than not, they would be happy to have as many children as they could. So that social context really changed. And
That's a good background you've given, Tom.
yeah,
That's
people
good.
who are arguing
Coming from
both
South
sides.
Dakota, I guess big families are important.
Yeah. Yeah.
This, yeah,
So it, you know, this is a modern situation. You know, the other thing, I don't want to get too much into this, but on the whole abortion question, you know, one of the things science is you know, recognizing is the immense number of fertilized eggs, growing zygotes, embryos that are routinely flushed out of the body for one reason or another, or fail to implant.
And with respect to which the church has never devised any kind of funeral liturgy for all these living human beings.
No, but most of them, they're not even aware of. You
I
know,
understand.
that, and for most of history, until, you know, medical science began to discover those things, you know, that wasn't even a consideration. Why should the church develop a liturgy to address something that we're not even aware of?
Well,
Okay.
we were aware of
miscarriages and all that kind of
stillbirths.
stuff.
Oh, stillbirths, yeah, and miscarriages, okay, but that definitely was the case. But
Yeah.
you know, now you know, you read, you know, scientific journals and or reports of scientific journals. I don't read but you know, it's not all that uncommon that a fertilized ovum beginning to develop into an embryo fails to implant. And well, if you do hold that a person, that ensoulment happens at conception, you've got a human soul that is that has been created without any human bodily life to sustain it, because it got flushed out naturally.
What's the consequence or the result of taking that fact further, and how does that impact the church's constant
Well,
Hmm.
I do think that the, even in the Middle Ages, even with, I think, Thomas Aquinas, that there was no agreement on exactly when the human soul was
Yeah.
was imparted into the physicality of the developing embryo or fetus or
Isn't the, I forget, I mean, we talked about this years ago, Jack O'Hare, we were talking about it, and the church, it was a Tutsi or Pars argument that it's just,
Yeah.
the safest thing is just to assume
yeah. I
that.
I think that was very often the case, and I think that, let's face it, when we start willfully messing around with human reproduction and making use of scientific methods to basically work our human will on our, on how and when human life begins, we are treading on dangerous territory at very least.
Yeah.
I agree with that, Tom, but don't you think the fact that I've heard a statistic of like 10 to 1 fertilized ova are lost for everyone who makes it to the
Yeah,
to the embryo
that's pretty
stage.
much what I've heard.
Better?
So
Okay.
that being true, wouldn't that
I've got
weigh? Oh, okay.
I'll listen from a distance.
Okay, wouldn't that weigh against arguing that the civil law should prohibit women from having abortions at that stage, at least? I mean, isn't that
Say that-
weight?
Say that
on
again,
the-
George. George, start over. Start over.
Well, I'm trying, the fact that so many fertilized ova are irretrievably lost and we don't even know about it, and it's happening naturally and presumably providentially, isn't that a fact that weighs in favor of the pro-choice position on abortion?
I don't see how.
I don't see the connection, but anyways,
Boy.
I mean,
Well-
people are people.
Well, people are people, Ned, but why is this all providential God
No.
massacring 90% of them?
Well, therefore, we can do whatever we want to with them, right?
No, I'm just saying, how do you tell a woman that she can't abort this zygote or this embryo?
That might have gotten flushed anyway. Because the chances.
Well, it didn't get flushed. So, but its peers sure took a beating, and why? How? I mean, isn't it arbitrary then to say, okay, by the force of law, ma'am, we command you not to do this? And you or your doctor or somebody is going to suffer some sort of criminal or other legal consequence.
Yeah, there's another layer here that you've introduced, which I think is appropriate. One, we're living in a secular government, a democracy. We're not living in a theocracy, and common sense ideals or ideas of justice need to be promulgated. And given what you've just said, a whole bunch of folks would agree with you. Yeah, 9 out of 10 ova get flushed, therefore they must not be too valuable. And so why shouldn't we have a law that says, you can do what you want, and forget about the religious implications of this thing, because religion and science oftentimes don't come to the same conclusion.
Is better?
Oh, it's one.
Is that what you're saying, George?
Sort of. Me personally, I think we should give the benefit of the doubt that something is alive, a human, to not aborting it morally. I accept the church's teaching. I'm talking about if we were legislators,
Yeah.
Sitting up in Sacramento.
May I intervene here?
Please do.
So when I talk about knowing science, there are different methods in science. Classical methods, for example, teach you how things work, like the speed of falling bodies is 32 feet per second per second. But classical intelligibility always adds the clause ceteris paribus,
Mhm.
other things being equal.
Mhm.
And statistical science is in order to find out how often will other things be equal. So the probabilities seem to be that 1 out of 10 fertilized ova get to go on. But I think there's a high probability that the soul isn't infused in those ova. And the next thing is genetic method. And that's talking about living things with the principle of changing their form gradually throughout the course of their existence. And so I've had long discussions with what I consider more prominent, more responsible moral theologian. And I've more or less come to the conclusion with them that until the development of the fetus has gone to the stage of being most probably looking like a human being and also most probably being rational, it would be only then that the conditions are fulfilled for them to be rational. Only then would the soul be infused into that being. Otherwise, it's mainly biology and the processes of classical intelligibility, probability, and genetic
So by
understanding.
those criteria, Trump never had a soul infused in him in the first place.
It's highly questionable.
And so, Fred, you're taking the concept of viability, which is kind of a buzzword, I think, and you're kind of, okay, and I'm going to say this awkwardly, that you're kind of talking about maybe spiritual viability, and maybe spiritual is not the word that you were, but if I caught your meaning, you're saying that there is a time in the development of a fetus where conditions are set for the, I don't, is a soul created? Does it automatically pop up at a certain time? I mean, that's not the point. But are you saying that there is a time in the development that the soul then becomes part of that little fetus, and there's a time before that where the soul is not attached? I mean, that's crude, but I'm
Whatever.
Yeah, the soul isn't infused. That's right. That's what I think. I mean, I'm not an authority, and I teach immoral theology rather than moral theology.
You know, in first year high school, in general science, who was the priest that helped with all those
Ferris.
rockets? George, do you remember?
The Ferris?
Father Ferris,
No. The other guy who
Father Woods.
Woods.
Yeah.
I was in that class. I wasn't with you, Brains. And and he talked with us. We got into this very serious discussion and just sort of moved away from what he was talking about, you know, in elementary general science. But he explained to us that his belief was that until the zygote or the fetus reached a certain level of complexity, that then the soul was infused. But and that's what I'm hearing Fred basically say.
That's what I took Tim to mean.
Yeah, but I heard a few more attributes, rationality. I mean, how do you
I think that so human beings are a compound of organism,
Mhm.
psyche, and intelligence. And you have to have the development of the organism and the psyche to have intelligence, because we understand because we get images from our psyche and feelings. So for example, a Swiss psychologist I read about says that the first organ that develops is the ear. And so the baby can hear the mother crying, the mother arguing with the father, and to some extent the father. So what can happen is this person who has the conditions for to be rational or intelligent may have a screwed up psyche before they're even born.
Mhm.
Not to mention all the crap that can happen afterwards. So in other words, it's a complicated process, and I so much appreciate your mentioning that Father Woods, he seemed to understand that, at least basically.
Yeah, well, you know, there's a family, or was a couple, Pakaluk. Tom, you know them. I think it's they were two very, very bright Harvard Catholics. They at least one of them, I think, was a convert, and they really became just pickled in Catholic doctrine. Read encyclicals, read the documents of Vatican II, et cetera, et cetera. And I remember.
Did they read the Bible?
Absolutely. Yeah,
Good.
absolutely. These were people that I just so admired. I mean, I didn't get to know them till, very relatively recently. But the woman used to say, I can't remember what her first name was, last name Pakaluk.
How do you spell it?
Pardon?
How do you spell it? I don't recall.
P-A-K. I've got one of the books here, which I can show you later, or I'll give you the spelling, but she used to say, when the egg is fertilized, it becomes something else other than the egg and the sperm together.
Yeah.
Well,
that's very true.
And what is it, she'd say? Is it what develops from it? Well, a human being, yeah. But it's not a human being, she'd ask. And no, because it doesn't have, any of the cognizable attributes of a human being, except the potential material, the material that has the potency. And she'd say, well, is it a horse? Is it a dog? George used to say, is it an elephant or George Crook here? It's a human.
Hello. Hi.
It's human material, isn't it? It's a human there. It's human. And so are you going to take human material and put it in a Petri dish Are you going to cut it up and try to clone it? Are you going to try to grow it and maybe use the parts for people who need those parts because you can, because it's doable? No, it's human.
Well, holistically thinking, thinking in terms of essence, it's human. But I don't think that's what Fred was saying.
No, Fred wasn't saying that, but I'm introducing that idea and wondering how that changes, if at all, the
Fred's,
equation.
I'd like to introduce another idea and another word, and that is individuation.
Hmm.
Okay, that fertilized ovum that starts multiplying into the zygote and embryo, I think that's the progression of stages.
Yeah.
It is a distinct individual. It's a distinct human individual. It is a human being. Now, the question I would ask is, does that human individuality automatically make it a human person? And I would kind of say, we just don't know when you could actually call that a distinct human person. But I do think that if 9 out of 10 of those individual, genetically distinct individual growing human beings are naturally flushed out of the system, that at the point where they're naturally flushed out of the system, we probably should be careful not to glibly talk about them as a person having a soul.
I agree.
Well, that's what Fred said.
I may take a little issue with the word glibly.
Blithely.
But
Blithely, perhaps. Okay. Or we should not too readily identify the individual with the person.
I'm kidding.
Yeah.
But so let's think about this. So we've got to have the attributes of a person, rational, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Thank you. Have a good day.
What if we have this being that has eyes and ears? Hannah, George, little girl who's disabled and doesn't comport with everybody's understanding of what a person is. She's in a crib. She doesn't talk. She moves, but when her father walks into the house, this is a story George told me as I was getting into special education law. She'd walk into the father would walk into the house and say, "Hannah," and this little thing would
ostensible blob.
Yeah, would jump and move and just
Mhm.
Father would come then and pick her up and hold her and rock her and she was apparently happy. This is the interpretation. Okay.
Oh,
Move on to an old guy. I'm reading a book right now that I would recommend all y'all, and I'll send it to you by email, written by a woman articulate as hell. She was a speechwriter for George Bush. Anyway,
Articulate as hell.
her.
Why wasn't he? Did she teach him how to put food on his family and all that?
Well, I have some other stories about his dad that are amazing, but her father went through dementia to Alzheimer's. And there are so many old people that have their faculties so completely taken away or broken down or not evident. When are we going to say that the complexity of that being has broken down to the point where the soul maybe leaves it. And therefore euthanasia would be absolutely appropriate for it. I mean, can you see the
Mhm.
beginning and the
Yeah,
end?
that's a perennial question. I think that can only be answered definitively, in my opinion, by saying we really need to be careful.
Absolutely.
We need to be careful. We can't necessarily categorically, with absolute certitude, say one way or the other. Therefore, there certain principle of Tutsierism, the safest course.
Well, where are you going to assign the benefit of the doubt? Or to whom or to what are you going to give the benefit of the doubt that this being could be human? So let's give it the benefit of the doubt and treat it as if it is.
Yeah.
That's kind of what you're saying.
Yeah, yes, but how are people who are in extremis, a family, or a young girl, 14 years old, she's got a problem. Oh my God, I've got this problem. How do I get rid of it? It's a problem. She's not going through all this. Let's say she's 3 months pregnant.
Yeah, but the moral imperative is you help her with the problem, not to get rid of it.
Absolutely.
But
Mhm.
so many of our voices now want to prevent her from getting rid of it, but aren't helping her with the problem.
Almost would say that the majority might tell her that. And so what I think is as Catholic Christians, we have to do what you said, Tom, and that is be very careful. And George, give them benefit of a doubt. But that's a Catholic Christian position, and
Not necessarily.
well,
No. I mean, secular humanists, everybody would say, don't kill human beings.
yeah. Oh, okay.
Usually.
Sure. What I'm
Well, for example, I'm a member and a contributing member of Democrats for Life,
Mhm.
and
You and 2 other people.
no, they're growing, I think.
I
There's
should-
5 or
They're only
6.
going to grow
Yeah,
when
there's-
people actually become interested in supporting them.
I'd love to come back to the Democrats, but
But anyway, there are a lot of people who are not Catholic and not particularly religious who are still involved in pro-life movement.
yeah,
But
that's,
when I represented the Right to Life League in a previous existence, one of my greatest experts was this Jewish atheist who just, is just a clear thinker. I thought, another spin on abortion, to me, I think it's sinful. I argue against criminalizing it or banning it legally, but I think it's sinful. But I think, Fred, what do you think of this? To me, the sin is sort of the easily defined sin it's a sin against God's providence, because this entity is at least developing, and if left to its own progress or nature, it will continue to do so in God's providence, directing it along.
Mhm.
And we say, nope, we're going to interfere with it and end it. And to me, that's a clear moral argument against that practice than saying we're killing a human. I mean,
I would agree.
yeah.
I agree. I mean, I have heard so many instances of people through the time at BC, colleagues and so forth, whose parents have gotten Alzheimer's or dementia, and they don't remember anything about the past. But like you can go in and sing old songs you knew they were acquainted,
Mhm.
and they sing along with you, and they still have clearly a loving relationship with each other. And I just think there's no, it seems so stupid to try to kill something that's so alive and oftentimes so pleasant to be with and so kind and so forth from habituation. And and so that makes me hesitant to do that to people who are mean spirited and so forth too. So I think you're right, George. I think you're right.
Can I ask you a question? It's circling back to the birth control thing. I have heard, and I don't have any data, I've heard that one of the reasons for the very sharp decline in the number of practicing Catholics was the birth control thing. Was that encyclical?
Yeah.
Do you buy that? Do you think that there's a cause-effect relationship going on here, that if that had not come out in the 60s, that the Catholic Church would still have full churches? And I mean, seems kind of maybe I'm just naive. It doesn't seem to me that if most people simply ignored it, if they, I mean, I remember the priest at the Newman Center where we were going in Riverside saying, you need to have a well-formed conscience and you make the decision as to what you need to do, kind of thing. But I can't imagine that people would leave the church, but maybe they have.
I think some
What's
did.
your guys' thought?
I think it's very simplistic to say that's the only reason. There's just a whole constellation of related reasons, but I do think the Humanae Vitae did contribute to the reducing of the church's credibility in many people's eyes.
Okay.
Going back
Okay.
to why Paul went against the committee, I think it's because of the very super conservatives in the dicasteries
Yes.
that convinced him, look, if you change this, then people will start questioning Christology. It's stupid as hell, but they are stupid. But they have the power. And he would be afraid to go against them, I think. But I think he confessed that when he said, I'm not a good priest I'm not a good pope. What was the word he used? Tom?
Yeah.
Something like where do I have it?
Not a very good manager.
Yeah,
He wouldn't use that language, but yeah.
yeah. I lost that reference. I can't get it right away.
You
But I
get what I
think-
The other thing
Well-
that you mentioned, Tom Welbers, and it kind of goes with what when Gary first came into the group, he was talking about the change in the bishops that he's worked under. And Tom, didn't you say something that Paul had the idea that bishops should be very pastoral?
Right.
And then when John Paul II came, he was worried more about orthodoxy.
Right.
Am I reading something
Right,
and
right.
that
No, that is very true.
We
The
lost-
other
and that
thing-
he turned over the selection of bishops in America to this
Paul turned it over to Jadot. And Jadot
Okay,
had
Paul
a
did
mixed
that.
record. He himself tried to follow that pastoral criterion and got some problem people into significant positions. Eric being one of them. And Rembert Weekland,
Oh, remember him?
who had been the abbot primate of the Benedictines, for heaven's sake, and a marvelously pastoral person, but he had a bit of a fatal flaw there.
And so did you say that John Paul then wanted to have more, that a criterion for appointing bishops would be their orthodoxy rather than their shepherding kind of, I mean, is that what the
Yeah,
comment was more direct? Yeah.
yeah, that seems to be, the case. Now, I don't, don't carry that to extremes. I don't think
No, yeah.
Paul was disinterested in pastoral criteria. The other thing is, I think Paul VI also certainly would want bishops who wouldn't run their dioceses into a financial or administrative morass.
George Crook, you probably know this, and maybe you do too, Gary. So there's a vacancy in the diocese for a bishop. Who and where and how is it decided who gets tapped on the head for that?
Well, there's a process. I mean, it all depends on, I remember years ago, Mark Hurley sending out some sort of questionnaire to the clergy of our diocese saying, now that, I mean, there's nothing on the horizon, but as long as we have the time, if there's anybody that you think would be a good bishop, maybe now's the time to send that to me. And then I think eventually the bishop proposes a turnout, 3 or 4 candidates, possible candidates. I think it comes from a bishop. Tom, I think it comes from the local.
Yeah, more or
bishop.
less. I'm not too sure that the 3 or 4 candidates. I remember Mahoney did that several times also. He
Anybody that you think would be good, or like
Yeah,
it's not
yeah.
in the mix. And then that would,
but then the process becomes very secretive.
yeah.
In other
then
words, we don't know who
Yeah.
he may have selected to put on the turna, shall we say, I think,
Yeah.
to the apostolic delegate or the papal nuncio now, who then.
Is that who chooses?
Oh.
Is it those guys
No,
who
then it goes-
chooses a bishop?
No, well, wait a minute. The one who chooses the bishop is the Pope. Period.
Yeah.
Okay. But the process is, it does come from the local bishop doing his consultation, sends the information to the apostolic delegate in Washington, who sends it to the
Congregation of-
congregation of bishops.
Yeah.
Then it's the congregation of bishops that makes the proposal to the Pope, who then selects it or appoints them.
And along
And so
the way,
so for example, the National Conference of Catholic Bishops would not be deciding who gets to join their ranks. It would be, oh, okay.
They're
Okay.
not directly, so at their meetings, or by Zoom, they're not taking votes on priests in their own dioceses that to submit. It's up to the individual bishops to submit, to begin the process of
Interesting.
submitting.
yeah, who knows about this? Herbert told me, and Ned, I guess, that during a time in the Jadot years, Herbert was one. There are 2 priests that nobody knows their identity at the time, who have veto power over who goes to the congregation of bishops. Just 2 obscure priests somewhere, and Herbert was one of them for a number of years. And I asked Betty's brother, who's a bishop, is that true? And he said, yeah.
Really?
That's all I know. Does
Yeah.
that ring a bell with anybody?
That I don't know.
I never heard that. No.
I would, however, say I don't think that veto, quote, veto power probably would depend on how seriously the apostolic delegate or the papal nuncio would want to make it.
I don't know.
Yeah, in other words, I don't think they would have absolute veto power, but they would certainly have advisory power. That would be my.
I can't see giving some Jesuit somewhere veto power over your hierarchy.
Right.
But I don't know. He was involved in the selection. His first candidate was Archbishop Sanchez from Santa Fe,
Mhm.
And Herbert was very lukewarm about him, he said, but the Vatican stereotypically will appoint, when you have a leading aristocratic Catholic family in some country, the Vatican will often turn to that family, Schornborn in Austria, e.g., or I don't know.
Yeah.
Anyway, and that's how Sanchez got in. And Herbert, I forget what he said. He wasn't that impressed. And lo and behold, I guess nobody was after a few years of Sanchez.
Yeah. But remember, up until recently, I think France had the veto power over bishops. I mean, each
Who
country,
did?
France.
Oh,
Well, the concordant system gave these nation states a
Largest-
lot of clout,
Yeah,
well, China has that.
Right.
Yeah,
China.
China has that, and I don't know what they're anyway. The Austro-Hungarian Empire had veto power over the selection of the Pope.
Yeah,
In the early part of the 20th century.
I think wasn't it Pius X that eliminated that, and yet it was Pius X who got elected Pope because of it.
To that, and I forget who was veto, Rompolo,
Something like that, I think.
But Jadot also was, when John Paul came in, he did not like supposedly did not like Jadot's appointments.
Mm-mm.
And when Jadot retired, or maybe he was retired, I don't know, but retired, the usual reward for the nuncio to the US after you retire is a cardinal's hat. And John Paul didn't give Jadot one because he didn't like all these liberals.
Yeah. According to this book, it's interesting, Jadot died just short of his 100th birthday. But he was lifelong ill, particularly had heart problems and that sort of thing. And so he petitioned for retirement to the new Pope. And he was granted permission. Probably John Paul was very happy to retire him. He got a fairly short-lived appointment to a new congregation on interreligious dialogue. And he, for health reasons, retired from that fairly quickly after that, and basically went into somewhat seclusion for what was, I think, about 30 years before he died. So retirement was good for him.
30 years. Wow.
When the priest
Yeah.
abuse thing became so public because of the Globe article about it,
Yeah.
we had a canon lawyer from Catholic U who came to talk at BC, and he was recalling that before all these systems of choosing bishops were arrived at, dioceses at large were able to elect their bishops. And he thought that would be a good idea in relation to the way the bishops
Oh, yeah.
handled the sex abuse.
Yeah, there's there's a long tradition of dioceses electing their bishops. Now, most often it would be the clergy rather than the
Lay people.
laity.
Riffraff.
But
I just wanted to make a comment that have you noticed how our talks are dependent so much on Tom's questions? He's
Yes.
the one who asks wonderful questions. And it's so admirable how seriously those questions are taken by the group. And it's a wonderful thing that he joined us. I just wanted to mention that.
Well, thank
I
you.
agree with
Here,
you.
here.
I find everybody's questions, personally, I love Tim's questions because they're coming from,
Oh, I meant to say Tim's.
you meant
Oh,
Tim.
no.
That's what
Tim's. Okay,
saying. Yeah.
No, he
yeah,
didn't. No,
Tim's
Oh,
question.
no, I did. I did. Tim's question.
Mine
I-
come out of mine
realize you were-
come out of naivete. Come on, I just don't know what you guys know.
Yeah, but
I mean,
that's
I
good.
just-
But
That's
that,
good. But you ask intelligent questions.
Yeah.
And it's a great thing
Yeah.
for us
Yeah.
because we have given a lot of these things much thought and you help us do so. I think.
You're embarrassing me.
Thank you.
well, good.
Yeah.
We all need a
Hey,
little embarrassment.
hey, Tom Welvers,
Yes, Tim Elmy.
are we out of purgatory yet on Dante?
Yes,
Did- We
we,
are.
if we had gotten around to it, we would be going to heaven today.
Oh, okay. Well, maybe next week. Now, how many stages of heaven are there?
Um,
In the age of the embryo.
well, there's this, they talk about the seventh heaven. I really don't know. I've never read the Paradise.
Okay. I just was curious.
But we'll
Because
find out.
I've been, the thing on purgatory got a whole lot of conversation going among us. I don't think, and particularly Crook with his right wing, left wing ambivalence about whether or not it even exists. I thought that the whole topic of our talks for those weeks about does it even exist and what might it be like, I thought it was just fascinating, just really fascinating. So I'd like to at least do stage one of heaven maybe next week.
Yeah, well, there's only one talk on heaven.
And I
there
think
is.
it does exist.
I think so too. But Thomas Aquinas says the merit does count.
Mhm.
You've been especially holy. That it
Well, that's good.
makes a difference up there.
That's good. But mercy probably counts
Okay,
more than,
Mhm.
so I have a question for next week. And mainly, I guess the people who can answer it are the priests. And I include Ferrick in that because he was a priest for 7 years, wasn't he?
Yeah, 70.
Wasn't
6.
Ferrick a priest? Yeah.
Yeah.
Is, what do we, and I had a really, really good friend who was my former pastor. And I asked him, I said, okay, you have the ability to administer a number of sacraments. If God came to you and said, I'm only going to let you do one sacrament, that's it. I said, which one would you choose? And he said, reconciliation. He said, that's my favorite sacrament. And I said, oh, I would have thought, Eucharist. And he said, no, he said, reconciliation. And I don't know why I was so surprised by that. Then the more I got to thinking about it, I thought, wow, it made a lot of sense to me. And I never got around to asking him more than once or twice, what is it that you are hearing in the confessional these days? And that's why I asked whether or not after the birth thing came out, did all of a sudden that become topic A for like Gary Lombardi or Tom Welvers or, is that everyone said, oh my God, I got all these things. And so I confess, and I usually have a rich number of things to talk to Father Cook about. So I'm just kind of curious and maybe talk a little bit about the sacrament of reconciliation next week. Just kind of pick your brain, Gary and Tom, and what's your experience been, and would it be your favorite sacrament, or what would be yours, Gary?
I really don't. I have
Do
never,
one.
I don't know how I'd answer that right now. Oh, we lost Tim. Looks like.
well,
Where
he
you
doesn't
going?
want to hear your answer.
There you go. I don't have one right now. Here he's coming back. I don't have one right now. So
Yeah.
Tim, I don't know what I would say about that. I'd have to think
Okay.
about
But that priest certainly picked one that's fallen into desuetude.
it. Exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I personally find the question, I just would have to start out by saying that is not that's the wrong question, therefore you can't really answer it.
Yeah.
Well, it's my question. How could it be the wrong question?
Just to make the
I
homework,
will leave that up to Fred to comment on. because
Okay, all right.
I've got
he
a,
already answered it.
I've got to start.
He was
I've got
humble.
I've got to go.
get-
See you, Gary.
We all
See you,
gotta
Gary.
go. We
No,
gotta go. We'll
Happy
see you next
birthday,
week.
Crook.
Thank you, thank
Happy
you.
birthday.
Take care.
And
Thanks a
as a
lot.
birthday gift, let's spare George from singing.
Okay. Take care.
In favor of that.
God bless.
Fred, be well.
God bless you
Be
all.
well.
Be well, please.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.